Welcome to The Collective, where every conversation ignites a new perspective. Join us as we delve into the journeys of remarkable individuals, explore the art of growth, resilience, and the power of a shared mission as we strive to be better together. Hey everybody, welcome back to The Collective. We have another fantastic show for you planned out today. I am stoked. We got Seb returning, which is always nice. We got Rob here for the first time. Stoked to get into that. Shaun, always good to see you. And well, I am stoked. You should be too. Like the show, subscribe to the channel, hit the notification bell, do all the good stuff. Get your emails when we go live, which is, of course, Fridays for The Collective and Wednesdays for The Gold Mine. If you have any thoughts, questions, comments, anything at all, put them up in the comment section. We'll hit those throughout the show. And, of course, if you have not yet, make sure you are signed up for the newsletter. That is the Reinforcement Loop. Keeps you in the loop with all the stuff that we do here at The Collective, as well as gives you a little bit of brain candy to chew on throughout the week. Other than that, let's get into some intros. Rob, you're new here, so I'm going to hit you first. Give me a quick 10 to 15 seconds. Who are you? Where you come from? All the good stuff.
15 seconds. I've been a cop. I still technically am for about 25 years. I'm now with the NPF, so I'm with the union. So that's what I've been doing for the last 5 years, a bit of a union weenie. But most of my career was spent in uniform. I started up in Northwest Territories and then worked in BC. So I've worked in the smallest and largest detachments in Canada. And done a lot of really cool experiences, had a great career, come with a lot of lessons and trying to learn them and live in the Okanagan. So that's me in a quick nutshell.
I love it. Awesome. Seb, how's the Lower Mainland treating? No, not Lower Mainland, the the foothills. How's that treating you? You're not in the Lower Mainland anymore.
You gave it away though, as it's supposed to be a secret deployment. I'm good, man. I'm back in the foothills. Things are great here. I was at Waterton this morning, which is sort of, becoming more and more my routine in the morning early. And I was doing some reviewing on the manuscript for Shaun and I's book and doing some studying and things, and just looking forward to this conversation.
It's going to be a gooder. Shaun, how's mountains treating you?
Things are good. Looking forward to this conversation, of course, to Rob. I'm interested to learn more about Rob in this conversation as we're speaking about the subject at hand, of course. But I do want to not call out, but I do want to recognize that what I've been tracking from Rob recently is that larger, perhaps more national representation of some issues within policing right now, and the direction that Rob and I believe his friend or partner or his co-conspirator maybe, what they're putting out, I like on social media. And the reason that I like it is because it's being done in a professional way, in a polished way, but in a direct and no nonsense way that feels like it's being true to the problem without being disrespectful to the larger organization that is trying to sort it all out. And so I like the kind of insight to these kind of matters that I wouldn't have if not for individuals like Rob. So thanks for what you're doing, Rob.
No, thanks. And that's been an interesting bit of a transition, because the typically in police, you don't say anything. And typically that's because you're not allowed to. It's not that nobody has opinions. It's just you can't really speak. I'm in a bit of a enviable position, as is Chris. That's the guy you're talking about, Chris Voller, where we can. And again, we're trying to hit that line between respect for people who have had loss, or in some circumstances, or whatever it is, or disadvantaged groups, or whatever you want to call it, while at the same time pointing out that there's sort of a prevailing notion in the media that, police are to fix everything and remove your emotions and remove all the other stuff and just fix all the problems all the time and never call anybody out. And that hasn't been working lately in our estimation. So it's been an interesting sort of transition into that. And I don't think we're going to stop doing that. So I appreciate the feedback.
It's good stuff.
So I do want to add a little bit more feedback and a little bit more gasoline on the fire to what you're doing. And that is, I think the important distinction as to what you just said is, at one time there was the silent professionals, and now it should be quiet professionals. And so as just a layman, just a Canadian citizen who doesn't have full insight to all matters policing, I prefer a quiet professional rather than a silent professional. And I feel that currently a lot of large institutions are trying to play catch up as to how to correctly manage what you've just described, Rob, and that is giving out enough information that the general public understands the general merits or not of a particular subject, versus the absence of information, which then creates, that vacuum of disinformation, for lack of a better term. And so I think it's all just a calibration game now of catching up with, to some degree, the technology that we have, the internet, social media, etc. And again, I think that yourself and your partner are doing a great job of finding the right frequency for this moment. However, I'd like to challenge the pair of you, because in about a year, you'll have to dial up that calibration yet again to make sure that you keep pushing that pace to get the information out.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I agree. It is a tough balance, but and that balance changes. Right? Like any balance, it's always subject to the environmental factors around you. So right now, I think we're doing well, but I think I've heard before, to think and to speak sometimes will require you, I think, to make mistakes, and so that'll happen, right? And that's part of it. And we'll certainly and have got feedback when people think we have, so which is fine. That's part of the process. I'm happy with it.
It is. And Chance and I have made enough mistakes on this podcast that we've made all of your mistakes already. So, but again, I do appreciate what you're doing.
Thank you.
Good stuff. What do you got, Seb?
If I can jump in here for a sec, man. I mean, and this is, of course, Rob has always been extremely self-deprecating, and there's a ton more to this story, of course, of him and Chris, and both of them have been incredible contributors to their peers as well as the organization as a whole. I mean, the organization doesn't even know how lucky it is to have both of those guys. I've had the pleasure of working with both of those guys, and on several occasions, and sort of behind the scene, be in contact with some of the intent behind what was being done and all of those things. And man, I can tell you that, again, the organization does not recognize, nor would the member know, how much of themselves those two have contributed and given on account of the collective, never ever in a self-serving way. And so to see them team up, actually, for me is the stuff of dreams, because now they can go out and sort of force multiply all of the strategies or whatever they're going to employ to try to affect some positive change, and really not soak in the usual let's just bitch about everything and do all the things. Like, what are some of the actionable items? What are some of the things that are providing some oomph or some wind in the members' sail out there, because they feel heard and seen, because there are people out there that actually have their best interests at heart. And so seeing that has been incredible.
What's really interesting about this too is that it's way easier to have these fights when you have people on your six. Like when you have people with you that you can trust and know that they're gonna have your back through all of the difficult times that you're gonna have to face when you're dealing a large institution. It's great to have someone on your hip. So I want to get it right into the conversation. We're gonna be talking about friendship anyway, and this is a great example. What do you got, Shaun?
Well, we are talking about friendship, and so I've been trying to set the stage for the last few minutes with it. And so, interestingly enough, what you just said there, Seb, in respect to Rob and your relationship with me with you, you with Rob, with Chance, this little panel that we've got going right now is all like easily traceable. Like if you were to take out the hot tub time machine and chronologically reverse order how we all came together, it's easy to see through history. It's really easy. But what I do find interesting is most people never hear that story. They just accept that four dudes are on a panel and we're all talking, and it kind of came together auto-magically, and we are maybe aligned in ideas or not, but no one really ever talks about the full connect the dots backstory to how we all came here. And generally speaking, the reason that those things aren't talked about is because it's not that necessary to hear a full history on someone. Here's what is necessary, for me anyway. And that is, Seb looks me in the eye and says, I got a friend called Rob. And then he'll say a few paragraphs, and that's enough for me. That is the known quantity of having good friends who are good people, when they vouch for someone in a paragraph or two. I don't need backstory. I don't need history. I don't need all the connect the dots to where Rob came from and how he got to be in this panel. But, life isn't as simple as you hear a couple of paragraphs and then you understand a person, because Seb, throughout our entire relationship, has mentioned Rob's name a number of times, to the point where Seb mentioned Rob's name and I thought, wow, this guy is squared away. This guy is a good dude. This guy is ... And that's how we all work as humans within friendships. We never sit down and do a case study deep analysis on each individual. What we refer to is our other friends' references. Seb referenced Rob? Check. I don't need to know much more about Rob because I know enough about Seb. And so friendships aren't just about who you are friends with. Friendships are quite deep, quite complex, and tend to ebb and flow over time, of course. And so this term friendship, as a simple word, is in modern society has quite a sort of established definition that is static. Friendship just means a couple of sentences in our static modern world. But friendship is not static, and it is not simply understood. And so, of course, over the period of the podcast, we're going to hit on all of those things. But I just right out of the gate want to establish that our idea of friendship is probably not what modern society tells us it is.
Yeah, 100%. And so I want to go with the etymology, as we always like to do. Go back to what does the word mean? Where does it come from? The word friend comes from Old English, friand, and the definition of it is one attached to another by feelings of personal regard and preference. And I really like the way that's put together, of personal regard and preference, in the fact that we have to not only respect the person, but also prefer to be around them. We have to be spending our time to be with them. And I just love it. So I'm going to pass it around and see what you guys think right off the bat. Seb, I'm going to hit you first. What do you think? What was your first thoughts when this kicked in?
Yeah, I like that definition, actually, because it allows us to break it down in two different pieces, which makes that a person isn't necessarily your cup of tea. That doesn't make them somebody that you wouldn't have propensity to have a friendship with. If the other piece of the equation was somehow bridged in one way or another, that could be through a joint project, it could be through a deeper dive, it could be through a variety of different medium. But I want to talk about what Shaun sort of said earlier, and I again, it's early in the podcast to push back on anything, but I will bring just a little nuance here that I think is important. I'm not sure that the society's version of friendship, or the society's depiction of friendship, I think it's our natural propensity to oversimplify everything. I think that's what we're doing, is we're projecting, because really there isn't a very clear-cut established definition, or definition by attribution, even in aside from what can be broken down through vocabulary. But in terms of definition and how it's passed on, and how we pass on the information to our kids, and how we become friends with someone, and I think that we just never look deeper into it. And it's so interesting how looking at the verbiage around the word friend just opened up an entire other layer of conversation, and I'm sitting here going, I never even looked at that word. I have no idea what it actually means, and what the etymology on the word was, and yet I've been using it for what, 4+ decades. Clearly, we have a tendency to really not only oversimplify things so that we can make sense of them, but also to anecdotally stifle our own research or growth. Anyway, so that's sort of one piece. And then the other piece is in relation to what Shaun was talking about. That recognition bias is real. And it is probably one of the most powerful, if you have the right circle of friends around you, very, very rarely does it go wrong. It's incredibly accurate, actually, and I have quite the baseline to refer this comment on over the years in the field that I was in, and how people were recommended, and how things would come about. But every time I went out of that circle, it was a little bit more difficult to make that happen with some measure of accuracy. But again, so what I am saying here is your circle matters, because that circle is going to extend the circle, and you have to be able to trust your circle, because otherwise there will be injects that will prove this theory wrong.
I dig it. Rob, what are you thinking?
One of the things that I was thinking when you mentioned preference as part of the definition, so there's an active part of friendship. It's not just happenstance. It's not just that you happen to be in the same classroom or at the same gym. There has to be an active aspect to friendship, and I think that goes on, like that doesn't end. There always has to be an active component. You're not going to just maintain, and I'm sure we'll get into maintenance of it, but that preference piece I think is important, because you run into so many people. Like in my life, I think about the thousands of people I've worked with. I've worked all over the country, and you end up working with thousands, and not that many of them I would consider close friends, like very few. And that comes down to preference. There's lots of reasons. It's not very straightforward exactly what those reasons are, though, because it's not always about that we like the same things or we grew up similarly. And Seb and I are a good example. We probably could not have grown up much more differently in the same country, right? Like I grew up on a farm in Saskatchewan, my school was predominantly white and Indigenous. That was it. That was the only people in the town. There's one Chinese restaurant, but that was about it. Small town on a farm. And obviously Seb grew up in Montreal. As different as possible, same time, a few months apart, and so our friendship was nothing based on our backgrounds. So what is that? I don't know. I don't know what that preference is. It'll be interesting to delve in. I'd like to hear everybody's thoughts on that as we go. But one thing that I also want to just flag that I think we'll probably circle back to is I think it can also, like anything, go too far, right? Like friendship can go too far and can cause issues. We talked about, and Shaun pointed out a couple things early on, that you can take someone's word for it, which is great 90% of the time. But there's always 10% that maybe not, right? There is that 10% that, okay, I'm hiring someone based on that and merit and qualifications and whatever else be damned. Are you the in-group or are you not, right? So like it can lend itself to the negative parts of human traits just as much as it can to the positive. Maybe not just as much. That's probably not fair. But it certainly can, because we are a species that likes to overdo things, and so I know there's a lot of rambling thoughts, but that's my mind.
No, I dig it. I was tracking the something I wrote down here was the history comes out in the wash, and this is where you start to learn whose opinion to trust and then verify, and then whose opinion to just trust, right? Mm-hmm. Then Shaun brought up a great example in the fact of the podcast. Was I was starting the podcast space, somebody hit me up and said, hey man, there's this great guy named Seb, you should have him on the show. And I was like, okay, sweet. So I talked to Seb, and I had him on a bunch of times, and then he was like, yeah, I know this great guy named Shaun, you should have him on the show. And I was like, roger that, cool man, good to go. Same thing with yourself. Seb was like, yep, Rob's good to go for the show. I'm like, sweet, done. And it comes back to the fact that Seb and I have history, Shaun and Seb has history, you and him have history, all that stuff. But as Shaun said, that doesn't need to be discussed, but it will come out in the wash as we start to interact with each other, as we start to engage and do things with one another. That's when the history starts to be built and come about. Shaun, what do you got? I see you got a big smile on your face.
I know. And the reason that I'm going to go in the direction that I'm going right now, and my apologies to everyone who's going to listen to this later. I apologize to the guys in the green room just before we went live, or sorry, started recording this. What I did say was I've just come out of writing. Like I'm in writing mode, and the subject that I just finished like polishing off just before I came into this podcast is specifically on this subject. And so I got to say it because it's like in my prefrontal cortex and I got to get rid of it. And so it's this. Yeah, friendship will sort itself out in the wash through history. But I am going to push back on anyone who believes that friendship isn't created instantly the moment that you first meet someone, because it is. We all emanate a resonant signal, whether it's through our heart or our brain frequencies. It is an electric signal, whether it's through the resonant signal that none of us can detect, or whether it's through the micro cues of tone in speech, or words that are used, or how a person stands, or all of these micro cues that are given away before a person says the first word. As you approach someone for the first time, you're already determining whether you're going to be friends or not. And I use the term friend loosely. Maybe we'll just call that, as you're approaching someone for the first time, you're analyzing friend or foe. And so then, from the first second that you get a feeling of someone, before even a word is said, before a hand is shaken, you're 10 feet away from each other, that first indication of friend or foe is then delineated on a iterative basis moving forward through time. And so the time that you have could be 3 seconds to establish friend or foe depth, or it could be a lifetime of establishing friend or foe depth. And so I'll just do a quick, impersonal case study. If someone approaches me and I get a feeling from them, we'll call it friend rather than foe. The moment that I feel friend, I'm constantly digging deeper to understand why I feel friend. Because then we can take friend and we can delineate that down into, and it's already been done in our speech over the last few minutes, is it an acquaintance? Is it a friend? Or is it a close friend? And so we could slice and dice that up into different scales of, we'll never really be super good friends, all the way through to we're brothers from another mother. And so this is what we do as humans, either consciously or unconsciously. We're establishing friend and foe before we are even close to each other. And so it isn't history that comes out in the wash over like several decades. The history is being established in microseconds, or milliseconds more correctly. And so that, depending on how empathic a person is, or conversely, depending on how the other individual is projecting, these first few microseconds or milliseconds of a relationship can be so telling. It could be like a novel's worth of information. It could be an encyclopedia of information that you get within those first milliseconds. And so friendships can be established before the first word. And now I'm going to round it out by maybe saying this. Rob had established that Rob and Seb didn't really have anything in common if you were to look at it at surface value or face value or book value. And I totally disagree that they didn't have anything in common. They were as common could be to each other. They just hadn't felt it yet. Rob didn't know Seb deeply enough in his soul to understand what was important to Seb and what kind of a man he was. And conversely, same for Seb. And so before the first word was said between the two of them, I'll frickin' bet $1 million on the table right now that they were already friends. They just didn't know it yet. They hadn't said the first word yet. They hadn't shaken hands yet, and they were already friends. And maybe they didn't feel that like at a conscious level, or maybe they didn't put words to it as a definition until weeks or months later. Who knows? Who cares? But I know this for sure, that within milliseconds, I know who's going to be a friend and who isn't going to be. Now, I've kind of wrapped up my statement by saying that. And I also know that later in the podcast, we're also going to have to tear apart the idea that I just became instantly friends with someone based on my feels. And then about 4 days later, I realized that we can't be friends. And so, but that's for later in the podcast.
Pre-setting us up with a little bit of foreshadowing. I like it. I have something that just kind of clicked in my head here from what you said, Shaun. You're talking about resonance. And I really like the word because, yes, you can pick up a resonance. And I have a question based on this, because I think our resonance signals obviously are going to change through life, right? Because for some, you can make a friend as a child and keep that friend your whole life. And for others, you can make a friend as a child and then realize as you become an adult, like, that's not a person I want to hang out with, and move on. And so do you think that perhaps our friend groups, the people, our circle around us, are mirrors to our own resonance of the time period? Or do you think that they're reflections of how we feel about ourselves? What do you guys think? I'm going to hit Rob first. What do you think?
I don't know. Maybe it's a little bit of both. I think, like everything, but I wonder if it's also about who we want to be, not who we necessarily think we are. Right? Like, I think there's a lot of that where, a story we sort of tell ourselves about, this would be the person I would love to be, and this is the group of friends that person would have, not necessarily doing that, consciously. But I think there is something to that, and I largely agree with Shaun's analysis of first contact. The only thing I perhaps would push back is, does that become a friend immediately, or is it someone who has the potential? I don't know that, and maybe that doesn't matter. Maybe, but I agree, and I think over human history we would have to do that. I think that would be a survival technique. Like, before, things were, pretty non-violent now compared to history. But when we were in small groups of 100 people living in a clan somewhere, you would want to establish that pretty damn fast. Right? That was literally, you need it at that moment. So I have no question that immediately categorizing of people, even if it's not conscious, is required. But yeah, to your point, I think, Chance, it would be, for me, I think it's more about yourself, but also who you are seeing yourself as.
Oh, I dig that. I dig it a lot. Seb, what do you got?
Awesome stuff. So, it's a really interesting thing, because what actually happens when somebody recommends somebody, so to speak? So I tell Shaun about Rob, and Shaun respects me and decides to give Rob a shot. At the end of the day, as Rob alluded to, there's survival mechanisms involved in this. And this is, I think, where the difference is. Whereas generally you would have layered defenses, where the person needs to start going through layered defenses so that they can get to the point where you are open enough and understanding of them and their intent to want to engage further in a conversation. Whereas if I've already established that, maybe there's 4 or 5 walls that are not there. Your filter is a little less sort of stringent, so to speak, because now you have, and so it maybe in some cases you don't have one at all. Maybe you just take it completely at face value. And I would say that depending how profound your friendship and your relationship is with somebody, there are certainly instances where this would be warranted and be no problem whatsoever. And I can state that for this entire panel. So I have zero issue backing that up. But it's an interesting piece, because as the healing is occurring and as we're transforming as humans and as we're changing and as we're evolving and as we're doing certain things, the filters, so does the filter. And so now, to your question, Chance, what ends up happening, and sometimes I think the romantic in us humans wants to see friendship last forever, as it does with love and all kinds of different things. And I think sometimes friendship and love and relationships are a refinement process. And not sometimes, I think they always are. And so there are people that come for a season, people that come for a lifetime, and people that might follow you after. I don't know. Hopefully some do. But, I truly believe that it's the reason why, say, 2 people grow apart in the context of a friendship, we could have an entire episode on that. It really depends on so many factors. But at the end of the day, as Rob alluded to earlier, there needs to be an engagement. And so change doesn't necessarily mean growing apart. change brings an engagement that is required in us in trying to see if there is an adaptation that's required to continue sort of cherishing and engaging in a friendship. And so, and if this friendship is important enough for us, then change isn't always catastrophic at all. In fact, change might be preferable at times. And so for me, if a person comes into my life and we have a very, very sort of deep connection as friends, there has to be something fairly catastrophic for that to no longer be the case. And sometimes catastrophe is on a spectrum. If a person becomes somebody that no longer wants to do better and be better, that, in my book, can be catastrophic. If a person wants to do it too much and consistently reinvent themselves in a variety of different things and there's no degree of stability, that can be catastrophic also. So it brings back a concept that we talk about all the time, which is balance. Right. And so what is the balance and how does it impact our views of ourselves, our views of the person that we consider a friend, and the integration of those two things in space and time, you know?
This is we're already well below the surface on this question. I love it. Shaun, what do you got?
Well, press the elevator button because we're going down one more floor. So it's something that Rob had said that made me think about this. It's worth throwing out there just for you guys to chew on and can see where it goes or not. But so Rob was kind of talking about, well, I'm going to loosely infer that when we're considering friendships, perhaps we don't deeply consider the complexity of what the friendship can mean 10 years from now, 20 years from now. We don't understand, when Rob and Seb first met, neither of them probably projected forward in time and space and realized this is a friend that's going to provide ... Friendships are relationships that evolve over time. And I've already established that in the first moment, the first time, the first millisecond, the friendship can be established enough that, well, now you're friends. But then what does that mean? How deep does the friendship go? And so that depth can, in that first millisecond, be deeper, either knowingly or unknowingly, can be deeper than some friends that you'll have and spend time with for decades. Friendships aren't tied, I feel, linearly to the scale of time. I think that time can add depth or reduce depth in a friendship. And I also feel that friendship doesn't require massive amounts of time to develop the friendship. And so therefore, time is a malleable sort of variable or constraint when it comes to friendship. You don't need decades to get a good friend. You've just got to choose wisely. And that defeats the time aspect. And so, that's something to consider if you're playing with the time-space continuum. You have to literally manage time when you're making decisions. You can't just make a decision and then after the fact consider time. So that's something to chew on. The other thing to chew on is when we were talking about friendships and how we see these micro cues and all of that good stuff. Well, one of the micro cues that you can see, I wrote about it just the other day in my Instagram account, and it is power. And so friendships have a power structure. All friendships do. And whether you believe that or not, I don't know, but you do. And so what you do with that power structure, or how deeply you understand power within a friendship structure, can make or break a friendship. And so the micro cues of power are quite sophisticated and complex, and not just the recognition of power within a friendship structure, but also how it can be manipulated, how it can be obfuscated, how it can be dotted. Power is an aspect when it comes to friendship. So that's something that is worth chewing on as well.
So I have a great example that I want to throw to you guys. I want to see if this tracks for you guys. we see this a lot in the military, where you have a friend group, in the down in the bay, hanging out with your boys, all that stuff. One guy gets promoted into a leadership position, and now the power structure has shifted, and it's can be at times hard to maintain a friendship through that power shift. And I mean, I saw that all throughout my time in the CF, and I see it around a lot of different places. But I want to get your guys' thoughts. What do you guys think? Have you seen that before? Do you think it happens often? Rob, come to you.
Yeah, it does. And I almost, this is Rob speaking, I think unnecessarily so in many cases. So I remember, and we have a paramilitary structure, right? In every police organization has a paramilitary structure. And the number of times I've heard, I'm not trying to be their friend, I'm their boss. And you hear these trite, lazy excuses for just simply being a manager instead of a leader. And I remember getting, when I got my first promotion, now I haven't had that many, I've had 2. So it's not that complicated, but I'm at the 3rd rank of 16. So I'm at the pretty low level here. But when I got my first one, I was told very clearly, okay, you can't go to parties, you can't hang out with them because you're their boss now, not their coworker. And immediately I was like, well, and maybe it's my disagreeable nature, but I was like, well, you can be both, right? Like what are you talking about? But this was some high ranking person. So I sort of assumed they must know what they're talking about. Turns out they didn't. And maybe I will say maybe for them that was true, right? Maybe for them, they couldn't separate the fact that you could both provide direction and be friends, right? Like maybe they couldn't see how you could possibly do those two things. But that's sort of just a low level analysis as far as I'm concerned. If you should be able to and take it out of the work environment to a true friendship. If you have a true friendship, I'm hoping that you're guiding each other in some manner, right? Like it's never mind just a work relationship. Isn't that what most relationships should be, whether it's with your kids or your spouse or a friend? Hopefully it's not simply that you just assume that everything they say is correct. Like there are levels, and we can talk about levels of friendship, but if your level of friendship is that you just accept absolutely everything they say, and even when you think they're wrong, you don't speak it. You don't, there are lots of things you shouldn't. Fair enough. Like, don't correct me every time I say something wrong. That wouldn't go well. But there are times when I'm going to say something that's meaningfully wrong and should be corrected. And whether that's in a work environment or just, a play environment, I think that doesn't take away from, I think, the responsibility of a friendship.
So they're not mutually exclusive, which I love. Seb, what do you got?
I was going back in time for 20 plus years trying to remember if I said anything. I might have offended Rob.
Wasn't you.
Pulling the tapes, the VHS tapes. When it comes to power, it's a really interesting thing because there's a variety of different things that are to be considered in the context of power. And there's, again, man, this is extremely complex because there is an emission and there's a reception. The person is emitting a certain vibrational output when they become into power or perceive what their perception, based upon their perception of power and how they think is subdued. It should be utilized, and then you have the reception side of that. So how much of your insecurities and your own biases and things are injecting in your perception of what just happened to the person that right? And it doesn't take very long to figure out that there are several people. There's several people, and that could be experiential reasons. It could be for a variety of different reasons that have a very, very negatively infused vision of somebody going up the rank, no matter what, no matter how it was achieved, even if it wasn't, without driving everybody over the bus, and it was done correctly and in due form and all of the things. And we're talking about ranks here, but this applies in non-rank specific things, just in posture and just in the appearance of power, whether that's having some influence over somebody by way of being able to provide them some level of advice or be a sounding board or whatever the case may be. And then the situation changes ever so slightly, the dynamic changes, and now you're reassessing whether or not that person is still a sounding board. And so there's a lot of complexities here. There's the side of the person that's now in the chair, and then you have the side of the person that's seeing the other person in the chair. And so they need to be secure enough to not feel threatened by the person changing, elevating, so to speak, if we want to talk about it in the rank structure. And then the person that elevates needs to be humble enough to realize that their elevation doesn't reflect their, superior humanity, so to speak, and all of those things. And they have to meet somewhere in the middle. But with that, there's also processes that are important and boundaries that are important. And so let's talk about, say, ethical leadership, right? Like there are some things that as an ethical person, you're going to have to consider now when you're having these. So for example, to take Rob's example of going out and hanging out with the dudes, we had when I was on the teams many moons ago, we had a very good leader. We had an incredible leader that would stay with us while we had a few drinks, and then see ya, he was gone. And for the longest time I questioned that, but he was 5 or 6 ranks above everybody that was there, and his thing was, I'm going to come and hang out with the boys until it's time for boys time, and then I'm out. I'm going to let them do their thing. I think part of him was trying to avoid himself an internal of some sort, but but what I do believe is that there was a certain ethical line, and it's interesting because it maintained that sort of separation between the professional and the personal, which was needed with such a high discrepancy in rank in some of the roles that we were playing. And so I can see some instances where professionally that's needed, and that may be something that we have to navigate. But ultimately, it all comes down to, who are you fundamentally as a human being? If the person that is the emitter of the person that gets promoted, or the person that now is attached to a perception of higher power, what is their authentic self thriving on? If it's in authenticity and in humility and all of those things, the chances of that person accidentally finding themselves being, and don't get me wrong, we have that propensity. So there may be a creep, right? And there has to be an introspection that's continuous to see, have I crept up? Do I think that I'm better than I am? Have I become something else? Because we always run the risk of doing that. But then the person that's on the receiving end of this, that sees it, has to remove the filter of their own insecurities in relation to somebody or their friend being promoted, their own victimhood in relation to, why not me? And I haven't been promoted, or since you've been promoted, he's changed, or has he, or did you? Like, which is it? Did you change in relation to him, or did he change in relation to you, or did you both change somehow? And so authenticity, which has one of the most powerful vibrational output, positive vibrational output, is critical in this. Humility is critical in this, and understanding sort of the ethics implication, I think, is very important. But when you start throwing the baby out with the bathwater, now you can't do this and you can't do that. Every time there is dogma in anything, my head spins, because if you're going to make some really, really dogmatic statements, I don't know what they're anchored into, because that's the whole premise of critical analysis. It really just never is 100% this or 100% that, or very rarely.
You you made me think of the movie Pirates of the Caribbean, where they were talking about the pirates code, and it's like, they're really more like guidelines than hard rules. And I think pretty much across the board, everything's just kind of a general guideline. I had this thought about when you have power dynamics change with friends, and a lot of it sometimes is our own ego getting in the way of what we expect to happen, right? And then you can land yourself in all kinds of troubles. It's awesome. Shaun, what do you got?
So, but where does that ego come from? Because when I was a kid, or when I was a young man, when I was in my early 20s, no one talked like this. We never had these conversations. I didn't know any of this stuff. Tell you what, I would have liked to have known a lot of this stuff, but I didn't, because no one talked about it. And so when I was young, here's a moment that stands out to me as to how it can all go wrong. And it refers specifically to something that Rob said, and I'm going to loosely refer to it as systemic wisdom, system wisdom. And so it's that wisdom that someone passes along to you that just came from wherever, and everyone's just supposed to accept it. That when you, as the example, are promoted, then that very moment you have now been disconnected from everyone below you because you're not allowed to share the same restaurant together. You're not allowed to be in the same room together and be friends together. And the relationship changed in a microsecond. That was the system wisdom that I got passed on in this very moment. I was a young master corporal, just got posted out of the Canadian Airborne Regiment, and I was promoted to sergeant pretty much the moment that I arrived at 3 PPCLI. And I was a very young sergeant. And so I remember the RSM. I was living in the shacks with the junior NCOs and basically running the shack. And so I got promoted and I wanted to stay in the shacks with the troops. But the RSM told me, no, you're going to go in the senior NCO's quarters. You're a senior NCO now. As of now, you do not hang out with the men. You are a senior NCO. And he took me and marched me across the parade square and briefed me on what that meant, on how I couldn't do this and how I had to do that. And that walk took about 5 minutes. And he passed on in 5 minutes all of his system wisdom that accounted for nothing and meant nothing to me as I sit here right now. The advice that he gave me was terrible because his advice was based on advice that he'd been given that was terrible. And this systemic wisdom, I'll use in quotation marks, is the stuff of trite, lazy commentary from a system that is sloppily staying the same. Now, as a young soldier, I thought of myself as a modern soldier, and I was looking for modern advice, modern wisdom, something that felt like it wasn't from the 1700s. That's how I heard the advice as I was walking across that parade square, as like outdated advice, because it didn't feel right to me. And it didn't make me feel right about my relationship with what were now my subordinates and who were now my new peers. That parade square walk gave me nothing but bad advice. It gave me nothing but contention within myself. It gave me an unsettled cognitive dissonance that I didn't know how to solve. I chewed on that problem for days and weeks and months, trying to figure out how friendships were supposed to be destroyed in a split second, and then I was supposed to step across a parade square and reform brand new relationships that were replacing in 5 minutes what I'd built over years. The whole thing felt inauthentic. The advice felt contrived. And it didn't feel like it was advice given to me. It was advice given to everyone like me that had come before me, that had never thought about, why does this have to be this way? And I just thought, well, I'm going to start pushing back. I'm going to start changing the system. Because if the system doesn't feel right to me, I don't want to be part of a system that doesn't feel right. So I'm going to try to make changes. And so friendships and the reconfiguration of what the term means occurred in a parade square walk And so if I could almost completely invert my understanding of what friendship is supposed to mean in the military in 5 minutes, it was because I was forced to. I was forced to think about these things. I was forced in that walk to think, why does this suck? Why does this feel so off? Why am I so unhappy right now? Why do I really dislike my regimental sergeant major? I chewed on that. I didn't just accept it, swallow it, and make it disappear. And I do feel that that's what is critical to these kind of conversations, is we don't just accept that trite or glib wisdom, systemic wisdom that is carved in stone and has been forgotten about decades ago and just keeps getting handed out from the dusty library.
That systemic wisdom, and this is a great word for it. I do love the air quotes, by the way. That is true. I think it comes from a good place, because you hear a lot about World War II vets and Korea vets, and like when you start losing all of your friends over and over and over again as a senior leader, that becomes really difficult, and you have to create some sort of professional boundary at that point. And I can see where that would turn into senior NCOs are not friends with junior NCOs, right? Like you can see the trail of just not understanding where that comes from and that need for professional separation, and just spouting it out as dogman. I was thinking about my friends who we went through all our training together, who got promoted ahead of me, who I was stoked for. Like, yeah, man, awesome. You're going to do great work. And then at the same time, I would recognize that I can't interact with them at the same way at work, because there's a professional line there, right? I have to understand that this guy's now a sergeant and I'm not. Okay, cool. When we're outside of work and we're hanging with the boys, it's a different story. But that's my thoughts on it. Seb, what do you got? You look like you got something. You're muted though.
I was trying to center myself. I realized I was on the corner hiding like a creep. Man, those two things, those two injects were gold. They were worth their weight in gold, as far as what Shaun was saying, and then your follow up, because it is absolutely accurate. And I think when it comes to anecdotal stifling, as I like to call it, sometimes we, and as humans do with our negatively biased brains, is we tend to assign a level of nefariousness to a lot of things that aren't necessarily that complicated. It's not necessarily that it's nefarious, quite to the contrary. In fact, the person is really trying to help. And so it knowing that the intent is definitely not to make you do it wrong, then what is actually being passed on? And so if we were to extend this to the wisdom that, say, Shaun and I are trying to pass, and all of the people that have contributed to it pass on in the book, then with that logic, how would we pass it on, and for anybody to value it and to invest in it? Because we're passing on wisdom that's acquired through very similar process, that's acquired a variety of different ways. The point I'm making here is this: the best contribution we can make to anybody is to create the capacity for discernment and understanding different sides of the same coin, so that they can align that with their own knowledge, skills, and abilities. Because the issue with discernment is generally, and it's directly proportionate to your knowledge, skills, and abilities. So if you come in as a brand new NCO and you have very little of that, your capacity for discernment, for the finer nuances of what is being said to you, is compromised, to say the least, right? At the very least, compromised. And so I think that's a pretty balanced word. And so when we are looking at wisdom, and I go back to my previous statement earlier, we need to be self-policing dogmatic statements. That is something that I think anybody who's passing on anything to anybody, we kind of need to avoid really harsh dogma. And what we need to sort of do is to pass on different sides of the coin and their sort of for and against argumentation, rebuttal, whatever you want to call it. And this leads into a more constructivist approach, where the person is now required to engage their brain in that process. And the first thing you should do as a young leader is to start engaging your brain. And that starts ideally before the ranks are on your shoulder, but sometimes it doesn't, you know. Sometimes by way of process, you end up with ranks, and you have to kind of grow into them. And there is nothing wrong with that if you have the engagement, the capacity, and the curiousness to do it, and do so properly. And so as the people passing on the wisdom, understanding that the reality that will be experienced could be different than the reality that we're experiencing, that the reality that the time, the location, the job itself, there's a variety of different factors that can influence the way that things are going to shape up or turn out, even to the way that we are perceived by the world. I mean, we can have two different lives that are very aligned, but our perception, the perception that others have of both of us, is completely different, which leads to completely different outcomes. And so when I think of wisdom, I think of shared wisdom, which we refer to all the time in this platform, that we do so in the book as well, and just bring so many things to the conversation that a person, and yes, it can be a little overwhelming, but hey, there is no rush to this. You just dive in there and start looking, and you don't have to go, you know, to the ends of, to the Mariana Trench of depth on everything, but having below the surface understanding is really going to help you formulate what it is that seemingly is going to work better for you. I really think that once the person now is starting to develop KSAs or skills, knowledge, and abilities in whatever field, or even in life in general, they're able to sort of retrofit some of the information that you have given them, or some of the wisdom that you have passed along, to what works best for them in the context. And I think that those two things require a certain amount of flexibility, and it also requires a certain amount of understanding that, generally speaking, people do not provide advice nefariously intended.
Rob, what do you think?
Yeah, a lot of things. So to the depth of things, talking about Mariana's Trench, like, I think any topic, doesn't matter what the topic is. Mosquito larvae brains. I had a cousin who wrote a PhD thesis on mosquito larvae brains. So like whatever the topic is, you can dig however far you really choose to. I do this. It actually makes me think, and I want to ask a question sort of Shaun, back to your points in the systemic wisdom. And I agree with you with what Seb just said, that I don't think there's a nefarious aspect to that. However, just because something isn't nefarious doesn't mean that it's not potentially damaging or negative. And I wonder if it has more to do with bureaucracy than it does with really anything else. So bureaucracy's goal really is to protect itself. And that is the same in any organization. I assume it's the same in the military. And what is the safest thing to do with a newly promoted NCO? Well, the safest thing to do is, you're not going to ever go wrong with them not associating with people, right? You may not get the best outcome, but you're not going to have the headlines. You're not going to have the things that bureaucracy hates most, I think, which is damage to its own reputation. And so when you provide wisdom, in so much as that's the correct word, to say, don't go associate, don't go to the parties, don't do all these things, there is a power aspect to that. And I read your post there, Shaun, on power. It was bang on. And so it's more than just me. Let's say it's me who's the friend with a bunch of the people, then I get promoted. It's not just about me. There's also the power dynamic and how they see it, how the group that I don't know what's going on for them, how do they see it? So for me, it's like, yeah, this is fine. We can maintain this exactly as it's always been. But they may not see it that way. Right. So there is two sides to everything on this. But I do wonder, and Shaun, I'm curious on your thoughts, how much of the talk was about getting things better, and how much of it was about sort of systemic protectionism of the organization? Because I think that, in my experience, in any big organization, that's a huge part of what the organization spends its time doing. They've got a focus, and I'm not saying they don't do the focus, but there's like a 1 and a 1A, and protection is like it's either 1 or 1A, and sometimes it's definitely 1.
I dig it. Shaun, what do you got?
You're a good man, Rob. Thanks for asking the question, because I did want to build it out, but I felt I'd talked too long. I'll keep it brief, and we'll see where it all goes. So I've already said it was about a 5-minute walk. And most of the conversation, and I can't remember the word-to-word specifics, but I'll simply frame it out as such. The bulk of the conversation was constraints. The constraints that I had to now deal with, the boundaries that had now just been created. You could call him Jim 12 seconds ago, but now he's private. And so everything was constraint based. What it felt like to me was my much wider world that I'd been playing with had now been narrowed to, now you're only allowed to do this and you're only allowed to do that. And so that feeling that I got made me, my perception was I was being limited. And I don't like being limited. And my RSM didn't know me that well because I was a relatively new guy just coming in, a young Pathfinder. He hadn't had a chance to kind of get to know how my mind worked or how my body worked or how my spirit worked. And so he was delivering what I would characterize as a pat or as a rote speech. He had given that same diatribe, I'll call it, to people before me. And it had probably worked because those individuals had simply accepted it. But I don't like being stepped on. I don't like being told precisely what I have to do and you've got no say in it. That's how it felt to me. And feeling is important to me. What I feel is often different than what is being said. And so the feeling was really critical to me, that I felt, I don't like this at all. And the explanation that I was being given wasn't sophisticated. It wasn't granular. It wasn't based on him being able to explain it to me in a way that he'd explained it to another version of me many, many times. I kind of felt like an outlier. And so as I walked across that parade square, feeling what I felt, I was less receptive to what he was offering. I didn't say it out loud, but inside I was saying it to myself. I'm barely accepting what you're saying, dude, is what I was thinking in my head, or RSM. And so what did I do with that feeling? Well, that's what's run a lot of my life, is if I feel a feel, then I get to work on the feeling. And what he was saying to me and what I felt were two different things. And therefore I pursued my feeling of, I kind of don't think this is the way it's supposed to be done. I don't feel this is the way leadership should be at a universal level. It didn't feel right, and I'm going to fix it. That's what I thought, Rob. And so, like, I'm not going to say the rest of my career was based on fixing that one moment. The rest of my career was based on fixing a lot of moments, based on feelings, not just the written 1 and 1A. My 1 and 1A were feelings that didn't have numbers that I got to work on. And so I think if I was going to give any advice to anyone who was my age now, when I was that age, if you're in your 20s and you're facing these moments, I don't think it's okay to accept a one-way delivery of power. Because if someone's talking to you as a one-way delivery of power or direction or constraints, and you don't have the personal agency to interact with that moment, well, now it's an authoritarian situation. And I don't work well under those conditions, ever. And so maybe the last thing I'll say is this, Rob, that what I'm describing is not a great representation of the subject friendship with the subcategory of power, because I was a young sergeant and he was the RSM. We weren't friends. We were a rank relationship. But if I'm a sergeant and Chance is a corporal, and we see eye to eye as friends, then that is an entirely different thing than a one-way highway of authoritarian friendship. So to me, there's a distinction, and you know that, Rob. We all know that. But I'm going to broadly contrast the idea that friendship on the parade square at that moment was an authoritarian, non-friendship based situation, purely on power, whereas my true friendships are almost the polar opposite.
So I want to just touch on this because I think it bears a little bit of clarification on it. Is that we're using the military as and the police force as a proxy, because this happens all the time. It's not just about rank structure or promotion based, because somebody could start hitting the gym and then all of a sudden they're more fit. Somebody could start taking jiu-jitsu and all of a sudden they're more confident. Someone could go to school and come back, they get their PhD, and now all of a sudden it's different sometimes. And how well we navigate that shift from, well, this was this dude and now it's Dr. so and so, like, it changes how we see them, it changes how we interact with them, and it doesn't always have to be detrimentally. Change can be a good thing, but it happens throughout life. The power dynamic between friendships shift and flow and can be molded and kind of engaged, as we were saying earlier, with preference. So I just wanted to clarify that as we move into the conversation, is that we're using these rank structures as a proxy for that type of power change. And I love where we're going in this. I wrote down here, and I want to touch on it, is that we need to gold mine our friends. I think, because I say this in the fact that we have hierarchical friendships along the way, because there are people, as we were saying earlier, there are acquaintances. There are people that we interact with on a semi-regular basis. There are people that we actually consider, friends and buddies and people we can hang around with. And then there are like really long-standing, deep friendships that are hard attachments, things like that. But those things are developed as through struggles, right? Through the shaking of the gold mining machine. As we need the big stuff, the people that are just surface level acquaintances, we need those to wash off with time. And the question I have for you guys is that really deep bonded friendships usually come out of hardship, struggles, difficulties, challenging situations. People you go through basic training with, the people you go to overseas with, the people that stick with you through a divorce, the et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, right? Like, when you go through struggles, they're with you the whole time. And do you think that those differ in terms of friendships between just people you meet that have perhaps maybe gone through struggles of their own? What do you guys think? I'm going to hit Shaun first on this one.
I'm not going to add a lot to this because I'm interested. I feel like I'm talking too much, so I'm going to toss it off to the guys here, but I will establish just this one thing. And it's actually a bit of a pet peeve of mine. And I've talked to Seb about this. He knows my deeper stance on it, and I'm not going to elucidate that, but it's this. Currently, there is a word that gets thrown around within first responders, Leo, or military, and that is brother. The word brother gets thrown around. Love you, brother. Good job, brother. Can't wait to see you, brother. Can't wait to meet you for the first time, brother. And so the idea being that the word brother is thrown around casually because a member served in a really big institution, and now all of a sudden we're brothers. However, let's just play with that for a second, because talked about, if someone has a divorce, well, I've had a divorce, Maybe other people have had divorces. Does that mean we're now brothers because we've had a shared word? We've now had divorces. Now we're brothers. Or maybe, you know, you own a cat. Now we're brothers. Like these sort of like massive commonalities. Just because you've got a cat and I've got a cat, we're now brothers. That doesn't work for me. And that goes back to the levels of friendship. Somewhere on the scale of friendship, the word brother has a much higher meaning to me than just bro or pal or dude or what's up, man. Like they're all different levels of friendship to me. I rarely throw out the word bro. I rarely throw out the word brother. Rarely. I can count on one hand the amount of people that I throw brother at. And so, but it's thrown around like Skittles. And therefore the word is devalued. Now all of a sudden, everyone's your brother. Everyone's your friend. Everyone's your mega friend because you got a cat. And that does not work for me. So that's what I'm going to throw out. See where it goes.
Hey, man, don't be dissing my cat. We won't be friends anymore. Seth, what are you thinking?
Yeah, just skim on your question without really answering it, but just life is struggle, you know. So if you have a friend and you've been through any life whatsoever, you will have experienced either collective adversity or individual adversity that you will have had the opportunity to bounce off each other and see what the other person is about when things go wrong. And sometimes it can be very sobering. And so I do agree that there is some value in this. I do agree with Shaun that the word brother and the concept of brother even has been incredibly devalued by essentially using it, you know, very casually. And I don't know how to reconcile this with the fact that sometimes that little bit of familiarity actually tends to have a positive outcome. Like if I'm meeting somebody for the first time and that person is highly recommended, or if the person is a friend of a friend or whatever, and the person calls me brother, you know, it kind of it shakes off some of the more sort of procedures, so to speak, you know, like we're kind of a little bit more familiar. I think it seems to increase familiarity, and sometimes it kind of drops a little bit of the guard as a result of that. And so I'm not suggesting that it's absolutely catastrophic, but it is devalued, I think, in society. And I think that's something that we need to balance correctly. And not everybody that you call brother is a brother. And that can be a massive problem, especially if you have a deeper, more connected sense of the word. And what does that mean for each person? And I think that sometimes the fundamentals of friendship are really these angular stones, so to speak, of what your values are based upon. And this is having that in common with somebody. And so that you understand that, say, when somebody says to Shaun, this guy's my brother, Shaun knows what my version of a brother is, not just that I'm using the word and he can take the word at face value. It's fundamentally, we have common ground there. So he understands that. And so I think that brings, as it normally does, it brings a time for reflection. Have I been overusing this? Have I been devaluing my relationship with my brothers by calling randos brothers? Have I assigned too much value to a relationship that isn't necessarily reciprocal or isn't necessarily even real by using the type of verbiage that I'm using, and so what if it becomes a casual use of lazy linguistic issues over what I am trying to portray here? And imagine this. Imagine if we're in this room and there's four of us and three of us are brothers, and some rando just shows up and I call him brother also. I think that subconsciously and even sometimes consciously, your actual brothers are feel the devaluing of and I know because I have felt it, and that's in the way that you can see this is when you're with people that seem to treat everybody at the same threshold, so to speak, regardless of how long they've known them for and what the relationship is or anything like that. But this isn't about them, and this isn't about the use of vocabulary in whatever context. This is about me. Why is it creating something in me? That's what I care about, and why is that? And so I think that every time that something like this surfaces, there is an opportunity for us to refine ourselves. Like, why is this bothering me? And why is this real? Because it is real and it is bothering me, and it also shouldn't bother me on a variety of different levels. And there are negative consequences to the fact that it bothers me. There's negative consequences to the fact that the word is devalued. There's negative and positive consequences. But at the end of the day, the negative, the positive consequences are a part of that refinement process. And if I'm after refinement in every realms, then I need to be looking at this. How do I use the word? What does it mean to me? What does it mean when somebody else does it? And how do I feel in relation to somebody else say it? What do I feel when I feel the devaluing of it? And why am I feeling devalued? And all of those things are grounds for refining. And I find this, I don't know why, so therapeutic.
I dig it. I dig it. Rob, what do you got? Oh, you're muted.
There's a few threads to grab onto, which will lead to more. So if we start language sort of at the top of where I'm going here, I think what we've heard is one of the reasons why having language that we all understand and the words mean the same thing to most people is beneficial, right? If I see a cat and I call it a dog, nobody's going to know what I'm talking about. And that just at a basic level, we have to have some semblance of understanding of what language means, so it can be valued or devalued. It doesn't have any inherent value in itself. It's just what we put into it. So, but if we don't agree, so for me, what I call brother will be different right now than certainly what anybody else on this podcast even, or anybody in wider society means by that. So I'll sort of leave that alone because that could go forever down that road. But I'll touch on one more before I get back to your question on trauma and bonding and friendship. Brother, the word brother sort of implies a family. But there's some question as to the hierarchy of family and friendship. Like, just by virtue of someone being your brother, and I don't mean brother in a friendship way, I mean, actually, same parents or whatever, your brother, they may not be your friend. and so it's interesting. It's interesting that the two become interchangeable, that we call our very close friends our brother, but in many ways we sort of value friendship over family in many ways in society. So it's an interesting sort of way that we play with language. We know what it means, but then we kind of, there's a bunch of, friends or family that you choose. There's a number of these sayings that we all know that are interesting. I do think, Chance, to your point earlier, I think that some of the closest friendships do have or have had some level of the human condition, some level of trauma or challenge that has occurred. But I'm not so sure that is, is that a cause or an effect? I don't know. I think it's just, if you're a close friend, you will for sure experience that stuff together. One person will experience a divorce and the others will help them through, or one person may experience the loss of a parent or the loss of a child or a finger. I got through it. Okay. Seb and I, yeah. So if I knew more about martial arts, we were going to start a gym called Partial Arts. But anyway, that was the reason I got the finger cut off. I'm just not good enough as a white belt in everything, but I am consistent in that. I'm a white belt in everything. But I do think there's trauma bonding, and it can positive and negative, like anything else. If we talk about dogma, there's no positive or negative necessarily to it, but it for sure happens. And I've never experienced, combat. I've experienced policing. I've been a cop since I was, pretty young. So you have a similar tie in that. But I will say, most of my close friends, even in policing, aren't actually the ones that I experienced some of those things with. Like, Seb and I worked together, but not on the same team at any point. Like, we went to a few calls together by virtue of both being in the area, but I was a general duty patrol member, and he was largely on the ERT team. So we both went, but it wasn't, certainly my worst calls were not ones with my closest friends, and they never ended up being my closest friends. So I'm not sure, without pushing back on it, I do think there's an aspect to it, but I also think that's just a human condition. Life has so much challenge that you could always find an example with any friendship that's endured time where there was some trauma. So I don't know if you could use cause and effect. I can't at this stage, I don't think.
No, I dig it. And there are people that I was in combat with that I don't like, and I would not hang out with, and are not my friends. Like, but so you're absolutely right. I dig it. Shaun, what do you got?
So, Brothers in Arms. It's a movie reference. You'll hear references to it in songs. It's age-old Brothers in Arms. It goes all the way back to Spartans and beyond. And so, maybe that's a loose reference to brothers. Hey, brother, you're a brother in arms. And so we've already kind of covered that you can be in an organization that is, doing good stuff, and that doesn't necessarily mean that you're friends. You're quote unquote just brothers in arms. But that quote just part is you're still brothers in arms, but that doesn't mean that like you're holding hands super tight, looking at each other in the eyes and wishing that you could be actual brothers by blood. And so the term is so broad and so diluted that it almost doesn't have a meaning nowadays. And I'll make this case. I've got people who follow me on social media that I know barely anything about. I'll probably never meet, and they call me brother. They've never served in any institution that has a brother in arms sort of culture. They do it, I believe, because they want to be part of something. They want to be part of what I'm part of, whatever that is. And so the term brother is also a proxy word for I want to be in your clan. I want to be on your team. I want to get into that gang. I want to feel like I belong to something. And so then brother is the proxy for, can I be part of something more? Can I be in the gang with you? And so we all identify through, the complexities of life, through the power constructs, through all of the various things, who we are and what we want to be and what that looks like and where do I got to go to do it. And so on the internet nowadays, you can do that from the luxury of your chair in your living room and start like feeling that you're now a brother with people who you've never met. And it's not because you have certain attributes or you have skills or you're a certain height. It's just you want to be part of it. You want to be part of something, a team, a collective. And therefore, the common usage of the term brother, 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 friend, friend, friend. It's the foot in the door. It's the entry into the club. And so if the club hasn't defined that there's certain things that you got to be able to do to be part of the club, and the first thing is, I ain't your brother, or whatever harsh language you've got to use. I'm not saying that's the correct thing. Whatever boundaries you've got to put in place, just like that RSM put boundaries in place for me, constraints. I try to clean up people's language if they're in my life. I try to make sure that we are not miscommunicating because we're not talking. And so, generally speaking, I try to hold everyone accountable if they are using their language a little too loose in this particular concern.
So I got something on that, and Seb, I can see you're saddling up to the mic here. I'm going to get you in a second, but I'm going to push back a little bit on this, and I can't say it's not really a pushback; it's more of a nuance. The meaning of the words are ours alone, right? So the way in which I use brother is going to be different than the way anybody else uses it. Now, it's going to be similar. We have a general idea of what that word means, as you were saying, Rob, and that's like we have a general definition of what brother means. But the way I use it is going to be my own. And the only way I can figure that out is to take the time to create the definition for myself. And I think, Shaun, to your point, is people are using the terminology without actually doing any of the thought with it, so that I know what those things are. For instance, I use the word solid when I describe somebody. If someone is solid, that is like they're not static, but they can be trusted to that degree. Like they can hold something up, if you know what I mean. But your guys' definition of how that word, if I were to recommend somebody, I'd be like, hey, Seb, I know this dude, Rob, he's a solid dude. And you and I have that little bit of understanding, but someone else might not. And until we have that conversation or we develop that history so that we know what each other mean, it's left open to interpretation. And I love this idea with a bar. I was just thinking about that, is that there's a bouncer at the door, and if you know the knock and you know the password, hey brother, what's up? You can get in. But then there's bouncers inside too, similar to you, Shaun, that are going to come up to somebody and be like, you didn't say that right. Hold on a second. Like gatekeep a little bit. So I'm super digging it. Seb, what do you got?
Yeah, that's awesome. I love the analogy, and I haven't worked at clubs for many years. Relate to it. One of the things that I was considering while you guys were talking earlier was clicks, right? And how do those come to be, and how does that become a problem at some point, and how does a positive group of friends turns into a clique where now there's a certain amount of quote unquote exclusivity based on insecurities rather than humility and based on reality. So having people align. So I'll give you an example of this. And this is, again, always good for reflection, for personal introspection reflection, is if you are somebody that consistently resists or assigns a certain size to your group, for example. Like imagine if every time that somebody is introduced to the group, there's an incredible amount of friction. For whatever reason, there's friction. What is the friction about? Is the friction about bringing somebody in your quote unquote exclusive network, or is there something about that person that reminds you of the things that you either are not or haven't done? Or, is there any element of this that are reflecting on where you are as a human being? And I find this very interesting because generally speaking, guys that are quote unquote solid by the fundamental definition that we all agree upon in this panel, very rarely is there friction and resistance in bringing somebody in, provided that that person comes through the filter, which is one of us, right? And so, but if we're misaligned, or if our notion are not based in reality, or if we are insecure or threatened, or whatever the cases might be, then then every time that somebody wants to bring somebody in, there's an extra level of scrutiny or an extra level of, and this is where you see guys, even at the highest level of the fields that we all know and love, start tearing each other apart. Because the fact that you are a quote unquote top model doesn't make you think you're beautiful. Right. And so it's really interesting how even the people that have seemingly all the reasons in the world to be very secure in their own character and do main character stuff, a lot of them aren't. And so now what you are seeing is you're seeing cliques being created with something that could be very positive that turns into a negative very quickly. And so again, I'm bringing this for no other reason than for whoever is watching this. If there is a certain reaction that happens, before I start looking externally as to the reason why this person isn't the right person for the group, or this person is X, Y, and Z, or this, I start with me. Is there a reason why I'm reacting a certain way? And is that reason something that I need to be dealing with? Because I think, again, as humans wanting to refine ourselves and elevate ourselves, those are opportunities for refinement, provided we take them as such. And sometimes maybe we realize that person is simply misaligned and there's a variety of different things, and your concerns are legitimate, and then go for it. I'm in, no problem. When we think of the concepts of cliques, generally speaking, we always look at it from the outside looking at cliques. Very, very rarely do we think, I'm causing this. I'm causing this to become cliquey, or I'm causing this to become conflict ridden on. And that could be you on a team at work. It could be you at the library, for all I care. It could be you in a church group. I don't know what your circumstances are, but opportunities for refinement are just dime a dozen everywhere.
All the time, everywhere, doing all the things. And this is I love that you brought this up, because the military itself, or veterans itself, is a clique. We talk about it all the times, that and we see it a lot in the veteran community, where we tear down civilians, or we tear down somebody who wasn't on tour with us, or we tear down and you just slowly refine it into a really negative spot. It's bleh. Sucks. Rob, you got any thoughts?
I do. So cliques have they're generally seen as negative. Okay, so fine. So but take that word away. Just say group of friends. And I guess, and I don't know the answer to this, but what is the obligation on a set group, whatever that group is, to add more members? So is there, what is that obligation, and where does it come from? And I'm not saying it shouldn't be so, or that it isn't, but what is that? Like, how do you decide that, okay, my social calendar is full, I've got family to take care of, these are my priority lists, and friendships and maintaining friendships actively are one of the obligations that I find valuable, that I want to continue, but I'm full. Like, I don't have more time. My kids are still not with driver's licenses, and I've got, I try to hit the gym, and I want to make good food. So there's only so many hours I have left. So what is our obligation to bring in someone who wants in? Because I know that DAO requires, active participation if we're going to maintain this. So I don't know the answer, but I'm actually curious on your folks' thoughts on that, because I agree, cliques, generally speaking, not good. Like, you think about it at school from a high school context, and how negative that can be for someone who wants to be part, and nobody's accepting new applicants. And that isn't only in school, right? We've seen it in work many, many times, and we've all by the way, you've all been part of it. Like, we've all been there. We've all been the person in the clique that has excluded someone, actively or passively. But what's that obligation? Is it just part of society? And how wide does that go? So I'm curious, where preference and allowing people into the group, where that sort of interaction is.
If I may. Okay, so I'm in agreement if I'm hearing that clicks are generally have the connotation of being negative. They generally do have that connotation as negative, but they're not if they're used well. But then how can they be used well? So let me throw out my definition of what a click is, and it's a word, single word, and it's specialization. And I know that that's not a great word to properly describe what a click is because, again, specialization doesn't take into account whether it's positive or negative. But I'm not going to focus on that. I'm just going to focus on the word specialization. And so clicks tend to specialize. That's what distinguishes them from the other click that's next to it. That other click is specializing on something else, whether it's the hottest cheerleader click or whether it's the dude who can throw the football furthest click or whatever. Who cares? The specialization is the specialization. And some of those specializations are dumb and some of them aren't. Now, I said that specifically for a reason, because as humans, the clicks that interest us are not the dumb clicks. They're the clicks that we think are awesome. And what I think is awesome is different than chance. And so chance is in a click over there and I'm in a click over here because we have different interests. But that doesn't preclude us from also having a commonality, a shared interest. And now we're in the same click. So we're in shared clicks and we're in different clicks. So what's the problem with that? I've got no problem with that to date. Where it does go wrong moving forward is when it's a negative click. And what makes a click negative? It's when that specialization precludes someone who can add to the specialization. That's where a click sucks. Is when a good addition to the click is precluded for clickiness. And so that is when the click defines themselves as something that is dissonant to the individual who's coming in, even if that individual has something that could order of magnitude improve the click. And then that's feel. Like you're the wrong height, you're the wrong color, your nose is too big, your ears are too small, I don't like your mustache, whatever it is. That's the humanness that gets involved. Because if we stripped out the emotions, if we stripped out the resonance signature of the vibe, if we just looked at ourselves as zeros and ones, or we just looked at ourselves as a product rather than a vibe product, then there'd be far less clickiness, because there wouldn't be that dissonance, that emotional challenge, that personality clash, we'll call it. So we are human and we have clickiness, and that isn't necessarily bad as long as the click is run well. The click is always run poorly if someone takes exception to the vibe of an incoming individual and instead focuses on the static definition of what the group is trying to do. And that static definition may be misdefined or ill-defined. The group itself may not even know what its click is. Clicks are fascinating. I mean, we could do a full podcast on it. And so I'll round it out by saying this, that, if you're in a clique and you don't know what that clique is, what its definition is, but you're just there because you wanted to be in it, it's time to start asking yourself why you want to be in it. A lot of the things that we've talked about today can all be answered with hit the elevator button another floor deeper, asking deeper questions, the fundamental questions behind the feelings of things, the fundamental questions of the vibe of the clique. It's not what the clique represents on paper, it's what it represents in your soul. And you might want to be part of it because on paper it looks good, but your soul doesn't want it, and you know it, but you'll lie to yourself because you think on paper that's what you're supposed to be. That's the kind of friends that you want. But friendship is complex.
We could do a whole show on clicks, and maybe we will at some point. Seb, what do you got? You look like you're settling up.
Giddy up. So I'm going to. I don't want to call it a pushback because it really isn't. I agree with everything that Rob said, and his line of questioning definitely led to this inject. So therefore, it was necessary. But when you start looking at attributing a certain amount of value to the numerical number of, say, friends, or increasing numbers for the sake of increasing numbers, as in you're trying to add strength to your manpower, we're looking at a completely different concept than the concept of it's just going to happen organically, generally, but here's something: 100 of the right friends take less juice than one of the wrong friend, like by a long shot. So when it comes to bandwidth management, elevation in numbers doesn't necessarily take away. It often gives, provided that that person is the right person at the right time. And so if we take it very simply and we say, well, there's one more person, automatically I need to be engaged with one more person and try to maintain a friendship, it would be disingenuous to the amount of effort that we actually spend with our real friends. Because Rob, you and I, we should have conversations daily, and we don't, and we're months without talking sometimes. But there isn't a single day that goes by that I don't think of you, and I would assume that it probably happens at least a couple times a week for you as well, right? But that is fundamentally when a friendship is at the level where we don't need to talk daily. As long as we know that each other is good to go, we can feel that. And generally speaking, and if you've experienced this, you will feel like, I want to connect with Rob today. I don't know why I've had this feeling. And then Rob is like, man, I was just thinking about you, or whatever, or something's going on. Like there's a deeper connection, which, call it spiritual in nature, call it whatever you want, but there's something that there's more than meets the eye when it comes to really close friendships. And so, I'm not sure that the concept, there's some sort of societal concept that wants to see the clique increase necessarily numerically. I think organically it happens because we meet more people and more people meet more people, and it just seems to happen organically. But assigning a level of, or overstating our engagement with our current friends and saying, well, if this person comes in, then there's just one more person I need to take care of. Well, you don't take care of all the other ones, in the way that you are portraying you are. And that's not Rob or anybody. That's me. That's all of us, because life gets busy and we do things, and we have families and all of the things. But if you have the right inject, and that person fundamentally understands you and knows your inner workings, you don't take that lack of engagement, quote unquote, as personal. It's not personal at all, ever. And you don't assign a level of nefariousness or neglect or any of those things. And as soon as that happens, you just simplified friendship massively. But when you're assigning an unreasonable level of expectation, not only does that person now have to live up to that, but anything that they do that goes against that or don't meet it is automatically met with, you not liking it, or you resenting it, or whatever the case is. And so I just wanted to bring this up. Numbers don't necessarily equate to a lesser impacted bandwidth. Sometimes the drain that you have can be worse than 100 people that you have to stay connected with.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that. But I do wonder, I have a bit of a pragmatic. I'm hearing, Shaun, you talk about feelings a lot, and I do have them, but I often think in a very pragmatic sense. And so I read a fair bit, and humans historically can maintain about 150 relationships. That's roughly the number that they have said that humans can maintain. So I guess what I'm referring to is not necessarily an active choice. Like, I'm not saying, okay, who am I kicking out? But I'm talking more from the pragmatic sense that there is, and you're right, Seb, like once you achieve a certain level of a friendship, then that maintenance is almost not required. And I wouldn't say not required, but it sort of just happens. And I don't know what that is, right? Like, yep, some of my closest friends I don't have a daily contact with, whereas some friends that I would say are slightly still important, but not to that same degree, I talk to almost daily on different things, right? Like, so it is this weird dynamic, and I don't know how you put your finger on that. But I guess at the end, like when you get to the ends, you scale it out. And if you can only maintain that, now social media might have changed things. I will say that I don't know what the research shows on maintenance of relationships with new technology. And we haven't gotten down that road, but it's a completely different world. My dad's got friends, and he's 84 years old, but he's got friends in Nigeria, Istanbul. He's got like Facebook friends, but he communicates with them very regularly. So it's a different world right now, and he considers them friends. So I guess my point is not that you would actively be saying, okay, I'm not accepting applicants, but at some point there is a diminishing return. Like at some point, how many can you maintain at that early stage? And I'm talking more about the early stage rather than the multi-year developed relationship. Yeah.
Everybody's got something to say. We're all going to jump in on this. Everyone unmuted and said at the same time. I love it. Shaun, what do you got? We'll start with you.
You're right. I had to try to beat Seb. Unmute.
I beat both of you guys, though, so just so you
know. You did. I'm going to keep it super short, less than 60 seconds, 2 points. One is that when it comes to friendships, irrespective of how many we can keep, 150, 250, 50, doesn't much matter. We have a limit to be able to well serve our friends. I'm not talking about acquaintances. I'm not talking about knowing a billion people and nodding at a billion people. I'm talking about friendship now. So at a deeper level, if you can have 150 friends, here's how I run it, and here's how I've run it for a long time. And I have given this a lot of thought. We have our organic friends, and we have our digital friends. And all of that is energy. Digital energy, organic energy, and I'm entangled with it. The deeper my friendship, whether it's digital or organic, the deeper I'm entangled with it. An entanglement, call it quantum entanglement, call it energetic entanglement, whatever you want to refer to it as, I am now entangled. And who I entangle with is where I spend a lot of my time thinking about. And so everything has cost. All energy has cost, and it ain't just calorie cost. So I apply my entanglement in a conscious or an intentional way to produce the outcomes that I expect of myself as a visualized future. And so if I can't choose my friends wisely, I'm actually not being a good friend to myself. So that is one thing. The second thing is, it's a completely different subject. Bringing friends into cliques or bringing friends into friend groups doesn't have to be all kumbaya. It doesn't have to be like totally positive. I have brought in some people into some cliques or groups that I've been involved in where I know they are going to be a problem. They're going to be a thorn in some sides. They're going to be, to some degree, a micro hand grenade. That is because cliques need adjustments rather than one-dimensional thought. And so, at least the cliques that I like to be in, I like it to be a malleable clique, not a carved-in-stone clique. And so, the friends that I would bring into these friend groups are not friends that I would trust my life or my wife with, but they would be friends that are diluted friends, I'll call it, that I know are going to create outcomes, that I'm almost bringing in as an agent of change, are almost there to produce a result that I want, that I know they're going to create simply by being in the clique. Now, someone who heard that just now might think that that sounds quite nefarious or sounds manipulative or sounds like almost to some degree diabolical, but that's not how I think. I think that if I'm involved in something, I want positive outcomes, not negative outcomes. And so I'm always looking for ways to inject a positive change in whatever I'm involved in. So there's two things.
And well over 60 seconds. Holy jeez. Just messing with you. The one thing I just wanted to say, and then we're probably going to have to do final thoughts because we're running out of time here. In reference to clicks and friend groups and something like that, is it has to do with something that's one of my favorite words, reciprocity, in my mind. There is an expected reciprocity in any friendship, whatever that friendship is. Now, and to the point of clicks, if you want to be in a clique, if you want to be in something, and I have a great example. This is when I was at high school, I wanted to be on the football team. And why I wanted to be on the football team, I didn't realize at the time, but now I look back on it, they were getting all the girls, right? Like that was, okay, well, if I join the football team, then I'll have girls chasing me. Perfect. So I joined the football team. That didn't help at all. But I thought that if I did the thing, I would get the outcome, the expected reciprocity. And when you don't get that reciprocity, you start to figure out that clique is either for you or it's not. Similar to the collective with this group, the expected reciprocity is that everyone's trying to make everyone better. We're all trying to make ourselves better. We're trying to bring goodness back into the world, or whatever it is that we're, as a group, putting into the world. The expected reciprocity is every moment, do your best, every day. That's the expectation. And if you're not willing to do that, then you can't be a part of the group, because that's what the expectation is. And that's what it's preset with a clique, at least. Whereas with just friendships, there is that working out stage of trying to figure out what the reciprocity is. What is it that we're getting out of it from each other? And I want to say thank you guys. This has been an absolutely amazing conversation. And I want to go down the list and get some final thoughts on anything that we've talked about, friendship, as well as cliques, as well as senior NCO, junior NCO relationships, all kinds of things. So, Rob, you're up first. Any final thoughts?
Final thoughts? Yeah, great conversation. I've really enjoyed it. I think I'm just going to end it with sort of my thoughts on sustaining friendship and why people become friends, and perhaps how that maintains itself. And early on, I talked about growing up completely differently than Seb. And my main point on that is that's irrelevant. That's not one of the factors that develops a friendship. It's not necessarily shared interests that develops a deep friendship. It's shared values to me. So it's not that we both like the Buffalo Bills. Lots of acquaintances like the Buffalo Bills or work for the same company. But it's the values, I think. So values are a required element. I think reciprocity is a required element. And then trust. And if you don't have those three things, I'm not sure how you maintain it. And those are things that don't require daily conversations. That trust that when you do require it, you'll make that call and it'll be answered, or they can make that call and it'll be answered. So that to me is the difference between sort of a work relationship or acquaintances and friendship. Trust, reciprocity, and values.
I dig it. I love it. Seb, what do you got?
A few things. I wish I did this a little bit earlier so that Rob could get back on the mic, but I'll just be brief and leave it in the room for us to mull over for next time, perhaps, because I suspect there will be plenty of next times. So I just want to bring something to bear a little bit on what Rob was saying about pragmatism earlier, right? I sort of coined myself as a stoic and a pragmatic for many, many years in my adult life, and I still am to an extent. That has the propensity to lead to rationalism, and rationalism can be the killer of spirituality. Unfortunately, there's a lot of things that happens in life that we skim over it as pragmatic. Oh, this little thing I don't know, but whatever. Okay, and I'll point an example of this. Rob was explaining earlier how friendship is, developed and how things are going and all of the things, and then he said, then something happens, and then you no longer need that. I don't know what that is, and then he just kept on moving. Right? That I don't know what that is. That is the part that is very hard to explain, and that's the part where very likely spirituality, all of those things are coming in, right? But a pragmatic will skim over that. And I'm not saying that Rob does that. Obviously, he's always thinking deeper and doing the things, but it is a propensity of the pragmatic to become a rationalist. And becoming a rationalist can really kill various things, including your spiritual side. And unfortunately, as little importance that you think that has on your life, you're wrong. Like it has a massive importance, and it has a very insidious cost that can be the death by 1,000 cuts, especially if everything that you set your finger on needs to be touched and seen. Because there's plenty of instances in life where you will not be able to have that reassurance, that affirmation, and you're going to have to be hinging and anchoring in a much deeper concept. And so I will make a quick segue with Rob's conversation about leadership earlier. We were talking about organizational issues and trying to control optics and to prevent, certain things from exploding and doing all the things. Again, a very real concept organizationally that does not take into account the insidious nature of not creating the right culture into your workplace. Those things are not quantifiable. Therefore, they're not appealing or sexy to organizations. If you cannot quantify it and show data, as a pragmatic would love, you cannot explain why the leadership culture is completely shitty. Sorry for my language. But the reality is there is things that are being done at the insidious level, or that are very insidious, that are intangibles that you can't really put your finger on it. And those things are critically important, a lot more important than the importance that you give them in order to establish a culture that's healthy in your workplace. And so this is, for lack of a better term, organizational pragmatism or rationalism, right? Whereas now we do it on an individual basis. And so just something for us to chew on, I guess, for next time. And it was an amazing conversation. I loved every minute of it, and I can't wait to do it again.
Bam. We'll get you on. Don't worry. You'll be back. Always back. Shaun, any final thoughts?
I do. So what movie was it? Where the quote was, "Let's go do karate in the garage." What? Does anyone know what movie that's from?
Step Brothers.
Step Brothers, yeah.
Step Brothers, right? And were they blood? No. But they were doing karate in the garage. And at what point in that moment, when that statement was said, or they did that first front punch or whatever the heck they were going to do in the garage, at what point does the magic happen? Does it happen when you step into the garage? Does it happen the first time the heavy bag is hit? Did it happen the first time the sentence was said out loud, but the thoughts had been there for years? All of these things, all of these unknowns, as Seb said, the spirituality of a friendship. The friendship could be formed before the first word is said, as I stated early in the podcast. The friendship may never form based on either individual not taking the moment to feel the moment. All the words could be said, "Let's go practice in the garage." But if it was just words and no feelings, then there's no stepbrother moment in the garage. And so they're both tied at the hip. The pragmatic individual will listen to the words that are being said, and the spiritual person will feel what is being said. And the master of the moment is the individual who can listen and feel carefully. I think that's what leads to brotherhood in the garage, on the battle space, in the patrol car, behind the coffee lineup. Brotherhood occurs if you can master the speech and the feeling.
Yeah, I got nothing to add. This has just been an absolutely fantastic conversation, and I think every one of us can learn, build, and grow on their own friendships. And their own feelings within those. So see y'all next time. Chimo.
Chimo.
Thanks everybody for watching and being part of the collective. If this has sparked any thoughts or resonated with you, let us know in the comments. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. Your support helps us grow and keeps the conversation going. We'll see y'all next time.